I used to think painting footprints in the sand was really difficult. You know the ones I mean, that are on the walkway where there's lots and lots of footprints all together. But it's actually a lot easier than it looks. In this tutorial, I will show you how I do it.
If we haven't met yet, then hi, I'm Jen from Blue Beach House Art. I teach painting through clear, detailed and easy to follow video lessons so that anyone can create a life they love as an artist.
The canvas I'm working on today is 12 inches by 16 inches or 30 centimetres by 40 centimetres. And the paint colours I'm using are listed in the description part of this video. Are you ready to dive in? The main design elements have been sketched onto the canvas with the horizon at approximately 1/4 the way from the top. There's a few clumps of bushes and dune grass that will direct our eyes into the painting. 2 different greens have been used for the bushes and the grass so that they stand out against one another. Orange, that's been toned down very slightly with a little bit of cerulean blue, has been used for the sand, that is the nearest part of the sand. This colour's made gradually paler as it progresses towards the background. Let's get to the main part of this video, the footprints. Now I like to turn my canvas upside down for this because I prefer to work from dark to light. Okay, I mix up some cerulean blue with a bit of white until I find a nice mid-tone. This colour is used to apply the shadows in the footprints. Linear perspective is going to play a really big part here. That means that footprints in the foreground will be bigger than those in the background. In order to make sure I use enough linear perspective, I start with my largest round brush at the top so that I can get some really nice large blue splodges of paint all the way across the canvas. There's 1 splodge to represent each footprint. I would say make them large enough so that there are no more than 10 across the whole canvas. Now don't think too much about it, just place them as randomly as possible. Nobody thinks about placing their feet next to existing footprints in the sand, so there's no need to paint them that way. It doesn't matter if they overlap, in fact that's good. The last thing you want is too much repetition because it won't look natural. When your brush runs out of paint, which will probably be after you've covered a couple of inches at the top of the canvas, add a little more white to your paint mix. Then ease off on the pressure of the brush as you paint so that each splodge is a little smaller than those at the top. When it comes time to reload your brush again, switch to a smaller, medium-sized round brush. This will force you to make the next batch of footprints smaller again. Add a bit more titanium white to the mix so that the blue marks appear both smaller and paler as they recede into the distance. Making them smaller, of course, will naturally bring them closer together, so that you end up with many more footprints across the same area of canvas that you had at the top. This is how you create the linear perspective that gives depth to the painting. When you reach the final part of the sand, with the part closest to the ocean, switch to a smaller brush again. Used sideways, a flat brush will give me nice narrow brush strokes. So now the blue footprints closest to the ocean are not only smaller and paler, but also narrower than those in the foreground. Alright, turn the canvas back the right way up and we begin to get the idea of how the finished walkway will look. It's actually very rare to see shadows that are all just one colour. Surfaces at different angles reflect different amounts of light. So I need to add some variations of colour in the shadows. So let's introduce another colour that we can blend between the blue and the golden sand, a colour that's halfway between the two. Create a mix of the original sand colour we used in the foundation coat. It's quite fluid, about the consistency of melted ice cream, and I'm using a small flat brush to roughly cover the bottom half of each of those footprints. The thinner mix of paint allows some of the underlying blue to show through, so that the finished colour appears as a toned down shadow version of the original sand colour. Because the sunlight is shining towards us, the darkest part of each footprint will be just below the top edge, which is the furthermost part of each one. This new golden colour mix goes on the opposite edges, those nearest to the foreground, because although still in shadow, a little more light will be hitting that surface. A little blending between the blue and the golden sand colour will show the gentle slope of the sand at the edges. Now, the great thing about applying a transparent layer like this is that if you accidentally go too far over the edges of the blue, it won't matter, because that golden sand colour will blend straight in with the background. Just as I did with the blue layer, I switch to a smaller brush as I make my way up the canvas. I also make the sand colour paler with each section by adding more white. Now remember that we're only trying to cover the bottom half of each footprint, but there's no need to be too particular about it. At the end of the day, it's lots of varying degrees of colour and shape that we're looking for. Now, stand back and take a good look to see if your footprints look natural. Turn it upside down, look at it in a mirror, or take a photo to get a more objective view, if you need to. Now, if things don't look quite right, there's a couple of tweaks we can make to get these footprints looking more natural. Firstly, if they look too perfectly round, you might want to straighten some of the edges. I'm doing this by painting over the top part of each footprint with a thicker mix of the sand colour. I've added more white this time and a little pink so that this is slightly paler and warmer than the original sand colour. Placing the lightest highlight directly next to the darkest part of the shadow will sharpen the edges of the footprint so that it appears deeper. You can even drag out the corners of the footprints with a few small strokes of blue to sharpen those corners a bit more. If, on the other hand, your edges look too sharp, add a third tone between the golden sand and the blue shadows, and then blend that colour into both of those areas to create a soft edge. For the bottom edges, make a mix of the bright sand colour and add a tiny bit of the cerulean blue to tone it down slightly. Or if it's the top edge you need to soften, start with the blue and add a small amount of the golden sand colour. Sharpen or soften any edges as needed, and just remember that hard edges will show corners and soft edges will show curves. And that's really all there is to painting footprints in the sand. A couple more little tweaks are all that are needed to make my painting look complete. First, I want to anchor the dune grass to the ground. At the moment, it looks a bit like the foliage is floating in the air. On the left, I'll show a few vines extending out from the edges of the dune grass by painting a few small spots of dark green. Then I'll link these leaves together in a few places with a very dark reddish brown colour applied at the base of the leaves. On the right, I've used my fan brush to create a few tufts of grass with just the dark green. Now, of course, any plants or grass will cast a shadow onto the sand, so remember to add that below each piece of foliage that has sand showing beneath it. I've used the same blue as the footprint shadows for this. Now the very last thing I want to do is to tie the sky and the sand together by adjusting the light over the entire painting. At the moment, the colours in my foreground make it look like a sunny day because there's lots of contrast. The sky, however, is showing a soft morning light. That's not going to work. If I add a watery pink glaze over the entire painting, it reduces the tonal range, that is, the difference between light and dark in the foreground. This makes the contrast of the sand colours more subtle, as they would appear at sunrise. Finally, a tiny speck of cool yellow in the sky will show the rising sun. I repeat that yellow on the surface of the ocean and the very tops of the white foam on the waves. I've added a tiny touch of cerulean blue to my yellow so that the colour leans more towards green. That's going to make the sun stand out better against the surrounding oranges. When I'm done, I sign my name as a signal to myself not to touch the painting any further. And we're done. Key points to remember from this video are: make the footprints much larger in the foreground than the background. Be haphazard with the shapes. You don't want them to all look the same. Use varying shades of shadow colour for different parts of the shadows. And hard edges show corners, while soft edges show curves. If you would like more detailed instruction on painting trees, seascapes or skies, please check out the online courses I have on offer at Blue Beach House Art School. Thanks for watching.